Welcome back to the Engineered Angler and part 2 of making this sardine shaped stick bait. And if you'll remember from part 1, I introduced you to the material I was going to use. We cut out the basic shape. We did a little bit of carving. We established the amount of weight we needed. We inserted the wire harness. And finally, we put in the resin to hold all that stuff together. And that's where we are now. So if you haven't seen part 1, check it out. I'll put the link above me and we'll get started on the rest of this. Right, so you can see where I filled in on this slot with resin. It's a little bit shy. It didn't come all the way up. So I need to fill in about a little less than a 1/16 of an inch in here. And I'm just going to use some UV resin. Now there's a dozen ways to do this. This is the quickest and easiest one I know. So we'll fill in the gap just a little bit and then hold it under the UV light and keep doing it until we have it high enough that we'll need to sand back a little bit. First step, let's fill the deepest part first. I'm hoping you can see that I've got it up pretty high right here. The good thing about this stuff, if it overruns, you can always wipe it off because it won't set up until you have it under the light. If you're going to do this kind of thing with this material, this PVC stuff, if you really want to get a really smooth result from sanding, I would use a sanding sealer of some kind, just like you would with a piece of wood. Right now I'm just trying to refine the shape just a tad bit, just to make sure I don't have any weirdness. You'll notice that my tail hook eye comes out of the bottom, and that's because I decided I wanted to get a tail in here, a little tail fin, and so I wanted to have a slot in the back for my tail fin, and that's now kind of filled in with some resin. So I'm going to kind of cut that back a little bit with this Dremel tool. I wanted to leave a little bit of resin behind the eye here to give it a little extra sort of strength. So now we're ready for some foil. So I start off by tracing the shape of the fish right onto the aluminum foil. And I just do that with a ballpoint pen, and it embosses it pretty nicely. Then I'll fold this in half. And that allows me to cut out both pieces, left and right, at the same time. There's no special technique, and you don't have to be super accurate, just something generally the shape of the lure. I like to cut the fold as the very last thing. And now I've got both a left and right piece. Now I want to get the shape of the gill, because I'm going to cut away the part that covers the head. I'm doing this lure in 2 parts, a piece for the head and a piece for the body. And I'm using the same trick so I can get both at the same time. Now I'll trace out the part for the head and gills. And I'm just going to freehand this right onto the foil. Then it's just a matter of doing the same trick. I fold it over and then I cut both pieces at the same time. So before I get too far along and get this foiled, I should probably do a float check on this, right? Throw it in the water tank and see how it floats. Hopefully it floats. All right, this is my test tank, and I've got the hooks that I had originally weighed with the lure to get the right weight, along with the split ring, so I've got all the weight that I expected to have. So let's see how it does. All right, it's slightly head down, which actually is going to work in my favor. I think when I twitch it, it'll sort of want to go down. So let's see how quickly it rises. It's perfectly suspending. I can probably get it to float a little better by taking a little lead out of one of these guys. So I can probably just drill a thin hole. I'm not sure if you can see that, but I drilled a little tiny bit out of that one little lead. Let's see if that does enough. There you go. It's now very slowly floating. Pretty cool. I'm probably going to drill just a little more out to account for the foil I'm going to put on it, and we should be good to go. So I went ahead and sanded this back and got it all healed up from that minor surgery. So we're ready for the foil, but I really want to double check my sanding. So I'm going to put a little paint on this thing, because I find that when there's paint on it, I kind of can see the flaws a little better, and if I need to sand back, I will. So I'll get back to you when I'm done with that. All right, so I've got this pretty well sort of smoothed out, and I'm pretty happy with the quality of my sanding. It's not too bad. It's time for the fun stuff. Let's put some foil on this. I only want texture on the main body. I don't want it around the gills and around the head. So I'm going to go ahead and put texture on this, and this is my texturing setup. This is the basic one for larger pieces. I did a whole video on making these tools to put texture on there. You should check it out if you haven't seen it. And I'm just going to roll this steel roller over it, pressing pretty hard, and get that texture that I want. Hopefully you can see that texture. So I'm going to put the pieces on the body first. As always, you want to smooth it out from the middle out, and try to sort of get the wrinkles to spread out over the whole thing and not be in one location. This way you get a better chance of getting rid of them. I just take a smooth round rod. This one is steel, but you can use wood or aluminum or even plastic, and this way you can just roll in, burnish in your the little wrinkles and get rid of them. Alright, that's looking pretty cool. Let's put on the headpiece. And as always, you start with your fingers first and then slowly work your way to tools. And it starts to look kind of like this. Pretty happy with the results. It looks pretty cool. I'm going to try to get a little bit of black paint in this texture, and maybe a little bit around the gills, just like center line up. So I'm going to spray it down with some black paint and then wipe off probably 99% of it, and then we'll put a clear coat on it before we do the painting and the final clear coating. Alright, so I put the black on there, but I didn't really like the way it looked on the scales. I left a little bit in the gills, but I pretty much left it all silver. Now I want to put a thin coat of polyacrylic as a mid coat, and then I'll put a coat of UV clear to basically obscure all the seams and get ready for actual paint. Okay, so while the UV clear coat cures, I'm going to work on making one of these little tails. Now this little fish doesn't have much of a tail, but that kind of plays into what I want. I don't want a big tail on there. So I'm going to go ahead and take some brush fibers and I'm going to make my tail out of that. Now if you haven't seen how I make fish tails and fish fins, you need to watch the video I made specifically on that. It's actually a pretty cool little trick. So I'll put the link of here somewhere. And here's my rendering of that tail. All right. This is the first coat of probably 3 or 4 coats of the UV clear. So my intention was just to make sure I filled in those seams, and it looks like I did a pretty good job. And not a whole lot of blemishes. Pretty happy with this. A really light sanding, a wipe down with some alcohol, and we're ready to paint. All right, it's time to put a paint job on this thing. And I know every time I do this, I always say, oh, this is gonna be a really simple paint job, like 1 or 2 or 3 colors. And it always ends up being some kind of rainbow of colors. I'm like a little kid with finger paints. I don't know when to stop. But seriously, this one's gonna be a really simple paint job, maybe 3 colors. I've given it a quick sanding, just with some light sandpaper, just to take the sheen off of it. And now I'm wiping it down with some alcohol. And that'll take the dust off and any kind of oils that I added to it. So we're about 3/4 of the way through. You can see the little fins I decided to add, and I put a little bit of the transparent black highlight on it to give it a little contour or a little bit of an outline, not just the gold. Put a little extra black above on top of the head to sort of accentuate the contours I carved into it. After I get the next clear coat on, then I'll add a couple of small details, a little bit of red on the chin, and maybe just a bit of pink on the belly here, maybe a very light orange. Well, there's not much to do while the UV cures except for stoke the fire and maybe play with the dog a little bit. What happened, Poopy? Are you okay? Are you all right? All right, so my next step is to put the last details of paint on it and then get the fins on it. All right, I'm pretty happy with the way this thing is looking. And for once I held back a little bit on the added colors. So now I'm going to put the eyes on it, and then I'm going to coat it again with the mid coat, and then I'm going to take it over to the other bench and put the fins in. So now that I put the final mid coat on this, I'm wearing gloves because I have to handle it to be able to put the fin, and I don't want to have to clean it again or have to give it another coat. So the next step is to cut out the shape of that tail fin, but I really find that it's better if I've got it glued in first. This way all those little hairs stay in place. Alright, I've got it glued in to the tail. Now I just need to do the actual sculpting here and cut this out to the shape that I've drawn. Some sharp scissors help. And it always needs some refinement after the tape comes off, so let's pull the tape off and see what it looks like. Alright, that looks pretty cool. Alright, I'm pretty happy with it. It's nice and sparse, and I'm gonna trim it just a little more. I like the way the sort of color scheme in the brush sort of played into this a little bit. Alright, so now what I usually do is fill in a little bit more with the UV resins to taper in so it looks a little more natural. Alright, so I got that fin in, that tail fin in pretty nicely, and then I sort of backed out of doing the dorsal fin, and I did it because the slot I cut really wasn't deep enough to hold those fibers because of that wire harness that's in the top. So I backed away from doing it. I think this is cleaner anyway. I really like how just absolutely clean and natural this looks without that fin. So now I'm just giving it another coat of mid coat to cover the paint that I just put on, and we'll let this dry. And we're ready for the last clear coat of UV. I'm going to put it on nice and heavy, and then it's just a matter for it to set. We'll put the hooks on, and it's ready to go in the water. We'll let it sit in there for, oh, I don't know, probably 40 minutes, and it'll be ready for some hooks. Alright, I finally got around to getting this out of the turner here, and I'm really liking how this is looking. Those little pectoral fins that I put on there, I think added a little character to it. I really like the way the tail fin came out. I really like how the wide point really ended up being just at the center of the lure. It makes for a really natural kind of look. We finally got a sunny day out there, so let's take it down to the dock, and I'm gonna try to figure out how to get some water shots with it. Before I put it actually in the water, I just want to remind you guys that if you're enjoying these kind of videos, to please give me a thumbs up. It helps out, and don't forget to subscribe. Click the bell too. This way you know when I post. Alright, so we're ready to put this thing in the water. Let's see how it does. Can't wait to get this out on the Gulf of Mexico. But maybe it'll do a little damage in here too. I'll throw it around a little bit. Catch you in the next video.